Before the camps, before the trains, before the numbers, the smoke, the silence, there was life, real life. Loud markets at dawn, the smell of bread rising in stone ovens, children arguing over homework in narrow streets, merchants haggling in half a dozen languages, prayers whispered and sung and debated long into the night. There were weddings that lasted for days, jokes told at crowded tables, books passed from hand to hand until the pages softened with age. There were families who believed they belonged where they were born because their grandparents were buried there, and their grandparents before them, because their history was woven into the streets beneath their feet. Europe did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy the Jews. For nearly 2,000 years, Jews lived here, argued with their neighbors, paid taxes, healed the sick, lent money when no one else would, wrote poetry, built communities, survived kings and plagues and wars. This story does not begin with hatred at its loudest. It begins with belonging, and with the slow, almost invisible process by which neighbors become strangers, laws become weapons, and ordinary life is chipped away piece by piece until one day the unthinkable no longer feels impossible. If you want to understand the Holocaust, you have to understand what came before it, because what was destroyed was not just lives, but a civilization that once believed it had a future. Chapter 1. Before Europe had a name. Night falls over a city that does not yet know it will be called Rome. Oil lamps flicker against stone walls. Somewhere beyond the river, soldiers laugh. Metal scraping as armor is set aside. And in a narrow courtyard, a small group of men and women whisper prayers in a language older than the streets beneath their feet. They have heard rumors from the east. A city burned, a temple destroyed, a homeland turned to rubble. No one here knows yet what that loss will mean, or how far its echo will travel, or how long it will last. They only know that something irreversible has begun, and that survival will now depend not on armies, but on memory. When the Second Temple in Jerusalem fell, the world did not end for the Jewish people. It fractured. The destruction did not scatter Jews randomly across the map like ashes on the wind. It redirected paths that already existed. For generations before the catastrophe, Jewish merchants, scholars, artisans, and laborers had moved along the arteries of the Roman Empire. Roads paved in stone carried olive oil, grain, wine, glass, and people. Ships crossed the Mediterranean with predictable winds. The empire was a machine, and Jews were already inside it, speaking its languages, paying its taxes, learning its rules. In the eastern Mediterranean, Jewish communities had existed for centuries. In Alexandria, the air smelled of salt and papyrus, and Greek echoed through crowded streets. Jews debated philosophy alongside pagans and early Christians, translating sacred texts, arguing over law, faith, and reason. In Antioch, the scent of spices and smoke hung in the air as traders from 3 continents crossed paths. Synagogues stood not hidden, but visible, woven into the fabric of the city. These were not refugees clinging to survival. These were communities confident enough to argue loudly about scripture and civic life in public spaces. Rome itself was different, loud, chaotic, unforgiving. Yet even here, Jews found space. They lived near the Tiber, where the smell of water and waste mixed with the cries of dockworkers unloading cargo from distant provinces. Some were slaves, taken after earlier revolts in Judea. Others were freedmen. Some were merchants who understood that Rome's appetite for goods was endless. They formed burial societies, mutual aid networks, and synagogues that doubled as schools and courts. Life was precarious, but it was life. Roman law was not kind, but it was predictable. Jews were granted the status of a recognized religion, an ancient faith rather than a dangerous novelty. This distinction mattered. It meant the right to observe the Sabbath, to follow dietary laws, to send offerings to Jerusalem before its destruction, and to maintain communal structures afterward. It meant that Jewish life survived not because Rome loved it, but because Rome knew how to manage difference. Control was preferable to chaos. As decades passed, the loss of the temple reshaped everything. Worship shifted from sacrifice to study, from a single sacred site to portable traditions that could exist anywhere a scroll could be unrolled. The sound of chanting replaced the sound of offerings burning. Law replaced ritual spectacle. This transformation was not sudden or easy. It was debated fiercely, but it allowed Jewish identity to detach from land without dissolving entirely. Home became something carried in words, rhythms, and memory. Children grew up speaking multiple languages: Latin in the marketplace, Greek in trade, Hebrew and Aramaic at home and in prayer. Their fingers learned the texture of parchment, the weight of coins, the roughness of stone walls warmed by Mediterranean sun. They learned how to read faces, how to sense danger in a changing tone, how to belong without fully blending in. Integration was not invisibility. It was negotiation. In the Roman provinces of Gaul, Hispania, and the Italian peninsula, Jewish communities appeared quietly. A trader stayed. A family followed. A burial ground was established, because death always came before permanence. Names carved in a stone reveal lives lived between worlds. Some inscriptions were in Latin, others in Greek, some in Hebrew letters. Identity did not have to choose a single language. It layered itself. Yet tension was always present, humming beneath daily routine. The Roman world was built on hierarchy, power, and loyalty to the state. Jews refused certain acts that bound others together. They would not sacrifice to the emperor. They would not eat certain foods at communal feasts. They rested on days when others worked. To some neighbors, this seemed stubborn. To others, suspicious. Difference could be tolerated, but it was never forgotten. Revolts in Judea hardened attitudes. Each uprising carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. News traveled along the same roads that carried trade. Whispers followed Jewish merchants into new cities. Questions were asked. Loyalty was doubted. Even those who had lived peacefully for generations felt the ground shift beneath them. Protection under law did not erase resentment in the streets. And still, life continued. Weddings were celebrated with music and laughter. Children were taught to read before they were taught to write, because words mattered more than ornament. Markets bustled. Bread cracked open with steam rising into the air. Oil lamps burned late into the night as debates stretched on, voices overlapping, hands gesturing, arguments sharpening minds rather than knives. What emerged during these centuries was not a people waiting for tragedy, but a people learning how to exist within empire without surrendering themselves to it. Jewish life in the Roman world was adaptive, creative, and resilient. It borrowed and resisted at the same time. Roman architecture influenced synagogues. Roman legal concepts shaped communal courts. And yet, boundaries remained. As the empire itself began to change, new forces gathered. Christianity, once persecuted, began its ascent. Ideas that had once been whispered spread openly. What began as theological disagreement slowly transformed into something more dangerous. Jews were no longer simply different. They became symbols, arguments, explanations for suffering and uncertainty in a world losing its old gods. But that future was not yet written. For now, in these early centuries, Jewish life in the Roman world was neither golden nor doomed. It was human. It was ordinary. It was lived one day at a time, under open skies and crowded roofs, surrounded by neighbors who were sometimes friends, sometimes rivals, sometimes threats. The danger was not yet obvious. It did not arrive with banners or armies. It crept in quietly, through stories people told about one another, through laws that shifted language, through the slow transformation of belief into identity. And as the Roman world moved toward a single faith and a new understanding of power, Jewish communities stood at a crossroads they could not yet see, carrying with them traditions strong enough to survive exile, but vulnerable to forces still gathering beyond the horizon. Chapter 2. A People of the Book in a Changing World. The change does not arrive with fire or steel. It arrives quietly, carried on breath and belief. A man speaks in a crowded street about one God instead of many. Another refuses incense before a statue. Somewhere, a prayer is spoken that sounds familiar, yet not the same. At first, no one notices. Empires are loud places. New ideas are easy to ignore. But this one does not fade. It spreads. And as it spreads, it begins to look at the Jewish communities of the Roman world not simply as neighbors, but as something else, something symbolic, something unfinished. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Jewish life across the Roman Empire is deeply rooted. Families have lived in the same neighborhoods for generations. Synagogues function not only as houses of prayer, but as schools, courts, and meeting halls. Children learn stories that stretch back to patriarchs and kings, but they also know the rhythm of Roman streets, the price of grain, the tone of local magistrates. Jews are not strangers in this world. They are woven into it. And yet, the world around them is changing in ways that will slowly and permanently alter that relationship. Christianity begins as a small, persecuted movement, one among many religious currents flowing through the empire. For a long time, Jews and Christians are seen by Roman authorities as variations of the same thing. Both refuse pagan sacrifice. Both worship one God. Both are suspicious of imperial cults. But internally, the divide sharpens. Christians define themselves in contrast to Judaism. What begins as theological disagreement becomes identity formation. Jews are no longer just different. They are necessary foils in a story Christians are telling about themselves. In crowded cities, debates spill out of synagogues and into streets and homes. Scripture is argued line by line. Who is chosen? Who is faithful? Who has misunderstood the covenant? These arguments are not abstract. They shape how communities see one another. Christians claim inheritance. Jews insist on continuity. Each side believes history itself is on their side. The tension is intellectual, emotional, and deeply personal. As Christianity grows, Roman power begins to notice it. Persecution follows, but it does not extinguish the movement. Instead, it strengthens it. Martyrdom becomes proof of truth. And when imperial favor finally shifts, the transformation is sudden and profound. The empire does not merely tolerate Christianity. It embraces it. Laws change. Language changes. Authority changes hands. For Jews, this shift is unsettling. Roman law had been pragmatic. It had allowed Jewish practice because it valued stability over ideology. Christian rule is different. It is driven by belief, and belief demands coherence. Judaism is no longer just an ancient religion. It becomes a theological problem, a living reminder that the Old Covenant still claims validity. Imperial decrees begin to draw lines. Jews are still permitted to exist, but increasingly defined by limitation. They cannot convert others. They cannot build new synagogues in certain places. They are excluded from positions of authority that touch Christian life. These rules are often unevenly enforced, varying by region and ruler, but the direction is clear. Tolerance is being reshaped into containment. And yet, daily life continues. Markets open at dawn. The smell of fish, oil, and dust fills the air. Jewish artisans shape metal and glass. Merchants travel familiar routes. Families gather for meals where prayers are recited quietly, deliberately, aware that walls can hear. The danger is not constant violence. It is uncertainty, a sense that the ground beneath accepted life is shifting, slowly, but undeniably. Rabbinic leadership grows stronger in response. Without a temple, without political power, authority rests in interpretation, in law, in teaching. Study becomes sacred. Debate becomes a form of devotion. Communities invest in education, in memory, in systems that can survive without land or state protection. The written word and the spoken argument become lifelines. Children learn not just what to believe, but how to argue, how to remember, how to adapt. Stories of loss are retold not as endings, but as warnings. This is how we survived before. This is how we will survive again. Identity becomes portable, reinforced by ritual that can be performed anywhere, at any time, even under watchful eyes. But the surrounding culture is growing less patient. Church leaders write sermons that accuse Jews of blindness, of stubbornness, of guilt. These ideas filter down slowly, unevenly, but persistently. They appear in art, in casual speech, in the assumptions of neighbors who once shared meals and business partnerships. Suspicion does not require hatred to function. It only requires distance. In some cities, relationships remain cooperative. Jews and Christians trade, speak, and even share certain customs. In others, boundaries harden. Intermarriage is discouraged or forbidden. Conversion becomes a one-way door. A Jew who becomes Christian is welcomed. A Christian who returns to Judaism is condemned. The message is clear. Movement is allowed only in one direction. Despite this, Jewish communities do not vanish. They adjust. They accept certain limitations in exchange for survival. They learn which officials can be trusted, which streets to avoid, which times of year bring tension. Life becomes an exercise in awareness. Not fear exactly, readiness. As centuries pass, the Roman Empire fractures. Authority decentralizes. Local rulers gain power. With this fragmentation comes unpredictability. Where once imperial law offered some consistency, now everything depends on the beliefs and temperament of individual kings, bishops, governors. In one region, Jews may live relatively securely. In another, they may face sudden restrictions or violence. Still, there is no single moment of collapse. Jewish life persists in towns, villages, and cities across the former empire. Cemeteries fill with generations who lived, worked, argued, loved, and died believing that their children would continue after them. There is no sense yet that annihilation is possible, only that safety is conditional. The idea that Jews must exist in a diminished state begins to solidify, not destroyed, but subordinated, allowed to live, but not to flourish too visibly. This theological framework will endure far longer than any emperor. It will survive the fall of Rome itself, carried forward into new kingdoms that inherit not just roads and walls, but ideas. And as Europe slowly begins to take shape from the ruins of empire, Jewish communities find themselves once again adapting to a world that has redefined itself without them at the center. The arguments of theologians become assumptions of rulers. The quiet shift of belief in a policy continues. What lies ahead is not immediate catastrophe, but a long narrowing of space. A world where Jewish life is still possible, still vibrant, still creative, but increasingly confined by stories told about it by others. The danger is not yet in the streets. It is in the words being written, preached, and believed. Words that will outlive those who first spoke them and shape centuries to come. Chapter 3: Survival through Law, Trade, and Memory. The empire does not fall in a single night. It frays. Roads crack. Borders blur. Coins grow lighter in the hand. Authority retreats from distant provinces, leaving behind silence where orders once came. For most people, this collapse feels like confusion, then hunger, then fear. For Jewish communities spread across the old Roman world, it feels like something else as well. The disappearance of a power that once regulated life does not bring freedom. It brings uncertainty. And uncertainty is where survival is tested. In cities that once bustled with imperial officials, Jewish families wake to a quieter world. The sound of marching boots is gone. Tax collectors come irregularly or not at all. Local strongmen, bishops, and warlords begin to fill the vacuum. Law becomes local. Protection becomes personal. And identity, once managed under imperial categories, becomes something others now define on their own terms. Yet Jewish life does not vanish with Rome. It contracts, reshapes, and relocates. Communities that once thrived in major urban centers adjust to smaller towns and emerging trade hubs. In places like Mainz, Worms, and Speyer, Jewish settlement begins to take on a new character. These are not imperial capitals. They are frontier towns along rivers and roads where commerce still flows, even as empires crumble. Trade becomes lifeline. Jewish merchants understand routes others forget. They carry goods across fractured territories, navigating shifting borders with experience honed over generations. Furs, wine, salt, cloth, metalwork, and spices move quietly from hand to hand. Trust becomes currency. Reputation becomes survival. A single broken promise can echo across regions. The smell of damp wood and river mist clings to these towns. Market days bring noise back into streets. Voices overlap in different tongues. Coins clink. Animals bray. Jewish traders stand among others, visible but careful, knowing that familiarity does not equal safety. They learn who controls the gate, who commands the guards, who listens to sermons that turn neighbors suspicious. Law no longer comes from emperors. It comes from memory. Jewish communities rely increasingly on their own legal systems, built around interpretation and precedent. Rabbinic courts arbitrate disputes. Contracts are written carefully. Witnesses are chosen with care. The law becomes not just a guide to justice, but a shield against chaos. Children are taught early that knowledge is protection. Reading is not optional. Memory is not abstract. It is survival itself. Stories of past destruction are told not to frighten, but to instruct. This happened before. This is how we endured. This is what we must not forget. In this world, Jewish identity tightens. It becomes more inward, more disciplined, more deliberate. Rituals grow in importance because they create stability where none exists outside. The weekly rhythm of rest and work provides structure when political calendars collapse. Prayer anchors time. Law anchors behavior. Community anchors the individual. At the same time, dependence on local rulers increases. Protection is negotiated. Jews offer services others cannot or will not provide. They handle trade, money lending, administration. These roles bring privilege and resentment in equal measure. A ruler may shield a Jewish community one year and abandon it the next. Survival depends on reading shifting loyalties. Conversion becomes a pressure point. Christian rulers encourage it. Church leaders preach it. Jews who convert are rewarded. Those who do not are marked, subtly at first. Names are remembered. Lineages are noted. Difference is cataloged. Even without formal persecution, a quiet separation takes shape. Despite this, life remains stubbornly human. Children chase one another through narrow streets. Bread is baked. Arguments erupt over law, over marriage, over inheritance. Laughter breaks tension. Music carries through open windows on festivals. Life refuses to become only fear. Travelers carry news between communities. Stories of prosperity in one town, disaster in another. A massacre here, a protective charter there. Jewish Europe becomes a network of whispered intelligence, survival information passed along trade routes and family ties. No community is truly isolated. What happens in one place is felt everywhere. As kingdoms begin to solidify, particularly under emerging Christian dynasties, Jewish presence becomes more regulated. Charters are granted defining rights and restrictions. Some rulers value Jewish settlement for economic stability. Others view it with suspicion. Policy is inconsistent, but memory is long. Communities remember who protected them and who betrayed them. The synagogue becomes even more central. It is no longer just a place of worship. It is archive, court, school, and meeting hall. Walls absorb generations of debate. Benches bear the marks of hands gripping wood during arguments that matter because the world outside is unreliable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new Jewish culture begins to form in these northern lands. Language shifts. Customs adapt. What will later be known as Ashkenazi life begins here, shaped by cold winters, dense forests, feudal power, and Christian dominance. This culture is not imposed. It emerges organically from necessity. Relations with Christian neighbors vary wildly. In some towns, cooperation is routine. Business partnerships form. Daily interactions remain cordial. In others, resentment festers. Sermons harden attitudes. Economic envy simmers. Rumors spread easily in small places. A bad harvest. a sudden death. Someone must be blamed. The absence of strong central authority means that violence, when it comes, is often sudden and personal. A mob, a local lord seeking favor, a bishop proving zeal. There is no empire to appeal to now, only memory and adaptation. And yet, Jewish life endures, not because it is untouched, but because it bends without breaking, because it carries its laws, its stories, its identity in forms that cannot be burned or seized easily, because it has learned, over centuries, how to exist without guarantees. By the end of this era, Europe is no longer Rome's shadow. It is something new, fragmented, volatile, deeply Christian. Jews are no longer simply another ancient people within an empire. They are minorities within emerging kingdoms that define themselves by faith and lineage. The ground has shifted again. Survival has required adjustment. But the deeper challenge is still forming, still distant enough to seem abstract. The laws have not yet become weapons. The stories told about Jews have not yet hardened into accusations that kill. For now, life continues in careful balance, unaware that the skills developed to survive this world will soon be tested in ways no one yet imagines. Chapter 4. The Golden Age That Almost Was. The city wakes before the sun. Stone walls still hold the night's coolness, but inside the streets are already alive. Water runs through narrow channels, carrying the sound of movement through courtyards and gardens. The air smells of citrus, parchment, and oil lamps burned low. Somewhere, a scholar clears his throat and begins to read aloud, not in a whisper, but confidently, because here, for now, learning is not something to hide. This is not exile as remembered in sorrowful stories. This is something different. This is possibility. By the early medieval period, much of the Iberian Peninsula has become part of a vast Islamic world known as Al-Andalus. Power shifts not through slow decay, but through conquest, administration, and adaptation. New rulers arrive, bringing new laws, a new dominant faith, and a different relationship between religion and the state. For Jewish communities scattered across Europe, this change opens a door that had long been only partially ajar. In cities like Córdoba and Toledo, Jewish life begins to breathe more freely, not because discrimination disappears, but because it takes a different form. Under Islamic rule, Jews are classified as protected people. They are not equal, but they are recognized. Their faith is legitimate. Their communities are allowed to function. Their leaders are acknowledged. Compared to the uncertainty of post-Roman Christian Europe, this structure feels almost stable. Córdoba becomes a magnet. Its streets are wide and clean. Libraries overflow with texts from Greece, Persia, India. The sound of debate fills halls where philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and law collide. Jewish scholars move easily between worlds, translating texts, absorbing ideas, contributing new ones. Arabic becomes the language of intellectual life. Hebrew becomes sharper, more flexible, capable of expressing philosophy as well as prayer. For the first time in centuries, Jewish thinkers are not only preserving knowledge, they're expanding it. They write poetry that plays with rhythm and emotion. They explore mathematics, medicine, and ethics. They argue about the nature of God using the tools of reason. Faith and intellect are not enemies here. They are partners in an ongoing conversation. Daily life reflects this openness. Jewish merchants trade across the Mediterranean, connecting Iberia to North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Goods move through ports and markets. Paper replaces parchment. Books become more accessible. Education spreads beyond elites. A child with talent can imagine a future beyond survival. Synagogues grow larger, more confident in their design. Schools flourish. Jewish officials serve as diplomats, physicians, administrators. Their proximity to power brings prestige, but also risk. Favor can change quickly. What is granted by one ruler can be withdrawn by the next. And yet, for generations, the balance holds. Jewish families put down deep roots. Cemeteries fill slowly, marking continuity rather than catastrophe. Songs are written that celebrate beauty, wine, love, and faith. This is not a fantasy of perfect harmony. It is a lived reality of relative security, something rare enough to feel precious. But golden ages are fragile by nature. They depend on tolerance remaining fashionable, on rulers valuing pragmatism over purity. Over time, cracks appear. Political instability grows. Rival factions compete for power. New movements within Islam push for stricter interpretations of faith. The definition of acceptable difference begins to narrow. In some regions, Jews feel the shift first through language. Public debate becomes sharper. Legal protections are reinterpreted. Taxes increase. Dress codes are enforced more strictly. The message is subtle but clear. You may remain, but you must remember your place. Violence does not erupt everywhere at once. It appears in bursts. A riot here, a forced conversion there. News travels fast along trade routes, carried by merchants whose voices drop when they speak of what they have seen. Communities begin to prepare again, not to flee immediately, but to be ready. Still, creativity continues. Some of the greatest works of Jewish philosophy and poetry emerge during moments of tension, as if urgency sharpens expression. Scholars write with the awareness that their world may not last forever. Preservation becomes as important as innovation. Eventually, the political tide turns decisively. Christian kingdoms advance southward. The Reconquista reshapes the peninsula. Jewish communities once again find themselves negotiating survival under new rulers. Some protections are reaffirmed. Others vanish. Familiar patterns return. Dependency on royal favor. Resentment from neighbors. Accusations framed by theology and envy. The memory of coexistence does not disappear overnight. It lingers in architecture, in language, in shared melodies and recipes. But memory alone cannot hold back policy. Forced conversions increase. Restrictions tighten. Suspicion grows. The idea that Jews might truly belong anywhere begins to feel increasingly fragile. What makes this era so haunting in retrospect is not just what it offered, but what it proved. It showed that Jewish life could flourish in Europe under the right conditions. That persecution was not inevitable. That coexistence, while imperfect, was possible. And that made its collapse all the more devastating. As the peninsula moves toward the catastrophic decisions that will culminate in expulsion, Jewish communities carry with them both achievement and trauma. They will take their books, their songs, their ideas into exile once again, scattering them across Europe, North Africa, and the Ottoman world. The light of this golden age will not vanish. It will travel. But for now, as rulers debate purity and power, as laws harden and patience wears thin, the sense of safety that once seemed real begins to dissolve. The question that hangs unspoken in Jewish homes grows louder with each passing year. Not whether this world is changing, but whether it will still have room for them when the change is complete. The answer is coming, but not yet. And in the space between brilliance and collapse, Jewish life in Iberia stands as both a peak and a warning, a reminder that acceptance can exist and that it can be taken away. Chapter 5. When Faith Became a Weapon. The bells ring before dawn, sharp and urgent, slicing through the cold air. In the narrow streets, people stir, confused at first, then alert. Word spreads quickly, not in careful sentences, but in fragments. A preacher has arrived. The cross has been raised. The road to the east has been blessed. God has spoken, and he has chosen his army. For most, the call is distant, aimed toward a land far beyond the horizon. For Jewish families living along the Rhine, the danger is immediate, and it is already at their door. By the late 11th century, Europe is no longer a loose collection of post-Roman kingdoms. It is a continent increasingly unified by Christian identity, shaped by shared belief, shared enemies, and shared fears. The idea of holy war, once abstract, becomes concrete when Pope Urban calls for the liberation of Jerusalem. The message ignites something volatile. Knights, peasants, and the dispossessed alike feel summoned. Violence is sanctified. Bloodshed is reframed as devotion. As armies gather, they do not march straight to the Holy Land. They move first through familiar towns and villages, through places where Jewish communities have lived for generations. Places where Jews have traded, lent money, healed the sick, and paid taxes. Places where neighbors know one another by name. Places that, until now, have been bound by fragile but functional coexistence. In cities like Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, rumors arrive before the armies do. Stories of mobs, forced baptisms, slaughter justified as piety. Jewish leaders meet in hushed rooms, voices tight with fear. Some appeal to local bishops for protection. Others gather what they can, unsure whether escape is possible. The uncertainty is crushing. There is no empire to appeal to now, only local power and local mercy. When the violence comes, it is not orderly. It is chaotic, intimate, and brutal. Crusaders, inflamed by sermons that paint Jews as enemies of Christ, turn on communities that cannot fight back. Homes are broken into. Synagogues are desecrated. Torah scrolls are torn apart or burned in the streets. The smell of smoke mixes with iron and blood. Screams echo off stone walls that have witnessed centuries of ordinary life. Some bishops attempt to intervene. Some offer shelter within their palaces or churches. In a few places, protection holds. In others, it collapses under pressure, bribery, or fear of the mob. Even where Jews are hidden, the knowledge that survival depends on the whim of others leaves deep scars. Safety is no longer assumed. It is borrowed, moment by moment. For many Jewish families, the choice is unbearable: conversion or death. Some accept baptism to save their children. Others refuse, believing that forced faith is no faith at all. Entire communities choose martyrdom together, parents killing their own children rather than surrender them to what they see as spiritual annihilation. These acts are recorded not with triumph, but with grief so profound it reshapes religious memory. The massacres of the First Crusade mark a turning point. Violence against Jews is no longer a sudden eruption tied to local grievances. It becomes linked to grand narratives, to divine purpose, to global struggle. Killing Jews is framed not as crime, but as preparation for holy war. The logic is chillingly simple. If the enemies of God live among us, why wait to face them abroad? News of the slaughter spreads across Europe. Jewish communities, far from the Rhine, feel the shock ripple outward. Letters are written. Messengers are sent. Warnings travel along trade routes that once carried goods and gossip. Life everywhere takes on a new tension. Every sermon is listened to carefully. Every gathering watched. Christian society, too, is changed by what it unleashes. The line between faith and violence blurs. Zeal becomes virtue. Mercy becomes weakness. The idea that belief grants moral license to kill takes root. Even when official church authorities condemn excesses, the damage is done. A precedent has been set. Blood has been spilled in God's name, and the earth has not opened to swallow the killers. In the aftermath, Jewish life continues, but it is transformed. Communities rebuild where they can. Survivors gather the fragments of their lives and try to make sense of what has happened. Memorial prayers are composed. Names of the dead are recited year after year. Trauma becomes ritualized, woven into collective memory. The legal and social consequences linger. Jews are increasingly associated with danger, impurity, and theological threat. Protection becomes more conditional. Restrictions tighten. Economic roles become more narrowly defined. The memory of violence justifies new limitations. This is for your own safety, rulers say. This is to prevent unrest. Children grow up hearing stories not only of ancient destruction, but of recent slaughter. These are not distant legends. They are family history. Names of grandparents and cousins who never grew old. Streets where blood once ran. Houses that were never rebuilt. Fear becomes inherited. And yet, life persists. It always does. Weddings still take place, though guarded. Learning continues, now infused with urgency. The study of law becomes even more central, as communities seek stability and rules when the outside world offers none. Identity tightens again, becoming something fiercely protected. The Crusades do not end with the first wave. They return again and again, each time reopening wounds. Later expeditions bring new threats, new massacres, new moments when mobs are unleashed by rumor and rhetoric. The pattern repeats, often enough to become familiar. Too familiar. What makes this era especially devastating is not only the violence itself, but its framing. Hatred is no longer merely social or economic. It is theological. It is taught, preached, justified. Jews are cast as enemies not of a kingdom, but of God. That accusation cannot be negotiated away with service or loyalty. By the time the crusading fervor begins to fade, Europe has changed. Jewish communities are smaller, more cautious, more inward. Trust in Christian neighbors is fractured, sometimes beyond repair. The idea that Jews might be protected by law alone feels naive now. Faith has proven stronger than contracts. And yet, the Crusaders do not destroy Jewish life. They scar it. They reshape it. They teach it hard lessons about the nature of power and belief. The strategies of survival developed in earlier centuries are refined further. Networks grow stronger. Memory grows heavier. As Europe moves forward, the violence of the Crusades lingers like a shadow. It informs how Jews see the world, and how the world sees them. The weaponization of faith has begun, and it will not be easily undone. The danger is no longer theoretical. It has names, dates, and graves. What lies ahead will build on this foundation. Accusations will grow more elaborate. Laws will grow more precise. Violence will find new justifications. And as Christian Europe becomes more confident in its identity, Jewish life will be forced into narrower and narrower spaces, carrying with it the memory of what happens when belief turns lethal. Chapter 6: Blood Libels and Broken Promises. The accusation begins as a whisper, the kind that slips between neighbors in the space after a funeral or before a sermon. A child is missing. A body is found. Grief demands an explanation, and fear is eager to provide one. In a world where faith explains everything, the explanation does not search far. It turns inward, toward the people who are already marked as different, already suspected of hidden intentions, already burdened by centuries of rumor. The charge is monstrous, and once spoken, it refuses to disappear. By the 12th century, Jewish life in Christian Europe exists under a new and dangerous tension. The violence of the Crusades has taught a brutal lesson. Belief can authorize murder. Now that lesson mutates. It moves from battlefield frenzy to courtroom accusation, from mob rage to legal fiction. The target remains the same. Jews are no longer attacked only in moments of mass hysteria. They are hunted through stories. The first blood libels do not require proof. They require plausibility in the minds of those who already believe Jews are spiritually dangerous. The claim that Jews kidnap and murder Christian children for ritual purposes spreads with terrifying speed. It is illogical, contradictory to Jewish law, and unsupported by evidence. None of that matters. The story fits a need. It explains tragedy. It reinforces hierarchy. It transforms neighbors into villains. In towns and villages across England, France, and the German lands, Jewish communities feel the ground shift again. This time, the danger does not arrive with armies. It arrives with officials, warrants, and crowds that gather quietly, grimly, convinced they are serving justice. Homes are searched. Prison doors close. Confessions are extracted through torture, because truth is no longer the goal. Confirmation is. In places like Norwich and later Trent, the accusations crystallize into formal trials. Children's deaths, once tragic mysteries, become instruments of terror. Jewish men are arrested, interrogated, executed. Entire communities are punished for crimes that never occurred. The ritual murder myth hardens into tradition, retold generation after generation, each time gaining new details, new authority. The emotional toll is immense. Parents fear letting children out of sight. Daily routines become exercises in vigilance. Every Christian festival carries risk. Easter, with its heightened religious fervor, becomes a season of dread. The very calendar turns hostile. The Church's position is complex and deeply damaging. Some popes and bishops condemn blood libels explicitly, recognizing them as false and dangerous. Edicts are issued forbidding such accusations. But enforcement is inconsistent, and the damage is already done. Local clergy often ignore higher authority, either believing the accusations themselves or fearing backlash if they defend Jews. Silence becomes complicity. At the same time, economic pressures intensify. Jews are increasingly restricted to specific occupations, particularly moneylending, after Christians are forbidden from charging interest. This necessity breeds resentment. Debt becomes moralized. A creditor is no longer just a business partner. He is a symbol of exploitation, conveniently aligned with religious prejudice. When debts are erased through expulsion or execution, violence becomes profitable. Chapter 7. Expelled from home. The order does not arrive with shouting. It arrives on parchment, sealed with wax, read aloud in calm, practiced voices. The words are formal, legal, final. You have lived here under our protection. You have paid our taxes. You have served our courts and financed our wars. And now you must leave. You're given weeks, sometimes days, sometimes nothing at all. What you can carry is yours. What you leave behind will not be. By the late medieval period, Jewish life in Europe has become deeply rooted and profoundly fragile at the same time. Families have lived in the same towns for centuries. Cemeteries hold generations. Synagogues stand where Roman streets once ran. And yet, all of it exists under permission, not right. What is granted by charter can be revoked by decree. What was tolerated can be erased overnight. The first great expulsions do not come from chaos, but from consolidation. As kingdoms strengthen, rulers seek uniformity. Difference, once managed pragmatically, becomes a liability. Jews are no longer merely religious outsiders. They are political inconveniences, economic targets, symbols of everything rulers wish to control. In England, the process unfolds slowly, almost methodically. Jews are heavily taxed, restricted, accused, and imprisoned. Blood libels circulate freely. Debts owed to Jewish lenders become a source of resentment among nobles and peasants alike. By the end of the 13th century, the calculation is simple. Expulsion erases debt, seizes property, and satisfies religious pressure. In 1290, the order is issued. Every Jew must leave the kingdom. Families gather what they can. The sound of carts creaking under weight fills narrow streets. The smell of rain-soaked earth mixes with fear. Children ask where they are going. Parents have no answers. Some convert to remain. Others refuse and depart. Homes are abandoned. Synagogues are repurposed or destroyed. England becomes, officially, free of Jews for centuries. The land remembers them only in stone and rumor. France follows a similar pattern, but more erratically. Jews are expelled, recalled, expelled again. Each return comes with harsher conditions, heavier taxes, fewer rights. Jewish life becomes cyclical exile. Settlement is temporary by definition. Trust is impossible. One king's protection means nothing under the next. By the end of the 14th century, permanent expulsion hardens into policy. Across Western Europe, the message is unmistakable. Jews are not expelled because they have failed. They are expelled because they are useful enough to exploit and expendable enough to remove. Their success becomes justification for seizure. Their survival becomes proof of guilt. But it is in the Iberian Peninsula that expulsion reaches its most devastating and symbolic form. For centuries, Jewish life there has flourished in complexity, creativity, and integration. Jews have written poetry, practiced medicine, served courts, translated texts that shaped European thought. They have lived through changing rulers and shifting borders, adapting again and again. As Christian kingdoms complete their conquest of the peninsula, tolerance narrows. Forced conversions increase. Jews are pressured to choose between baptism and marginalization. Many convert publicly while secretly maintaining Jewish practice. These converts and their descendants become targets themselves, accused of impurity and deception. Fear metastasizes. Suspicion turns inward. Inquisition courts interrogate not belief, but ancestry. Faith becomes biological. Identity becomes inescapable. And then, in 1492, the decree is issued. All Jews must leave the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. No exception, no appeal. The exodus is immense. Tens of thousands move toward ports, roads clogged with families carrying what little they can. The sound is overwhelming. Crying children, prayers spoken aloud, arguments over directions and space. The smell of sweat, dust, and salt air. Ships are overcrowded. Prices are extortionate. Disease spreads easily. Some flee to North Africa, others to Italy, many to the Ottoman Empire, where rulers welcome them as skilled settlers. They carry books, recipes, songs, legal traditions, and grief. They leave behind homes that will soon be erased from memory or claimed by others as if Jews had never lived there at all. For those who convert to remain, life is no refuge. Suspicion never fades. The Inquisition hunts ancestry relentlessly. A grandparent's faith becomes evidence. Blood is scrutinized. No amount of devotion is enough. Conversion saves bodies temporarily, but fractures souls permanently. Across Europe, the expulsions reshape Jewish geography. Communities shift eastward toward regions where rulers still value Jewish settlement for economic development. The center of Jewish life moves again, carrying with it trauma layered upon trauma. Emotionally, the impact is devastating. Expulsion is not only loss of home, it is loss of narrative. Families who believe they belonged are told retroactively that they never did. History is rewritten in real time. Jewish presence is framed as temporary, parasitic, illegitimate. The past is stolen along with property. Children grow up without the landscapes their parents describe. Languages fade or transform. Dialects carry echoes of vanished streets. Memory becomes portable, but heavy. Songs remember cities the singers will never see again. The expulsions also change Christian Europe. They normalize removal as policy. They demonstrate that entire populations can be uprooted legally, efficiently, with popular support. The machinery of expulsion becomes thinkable, repeatable. The moral threshold is crossed quietly. And yet, Jewish life does not end. It reforms. It adapts. It finds new centers. Law travels where land cannot. Identity survives without territory. Communities rebuild again because they have learned how to do nothing else. But something essential is lost. The belief that endurance will eventually earn belonging. The hope that loyalty can overcome suspicion. After expulsion, Jewish existence in Europe is no longer imagined as permanent. It is provisional by design. What follows will not be immediate annihilation, but containment, segregation, control. The walls will rise again, this time deliberately. Ghettos will formalize what expulsion could not completely erase. And the memory of forced departure will hang over every settlement, every charter, every promise. The road ahead is narrower now. The lesson has been learned by rulers and mobs alike. Jews can be removed. Entire lives can be erased with ink and seal. And once that knowledge exists, it does not disappear. The next chapter will not begin with flight, but with confinement. Not with movement, but with walls. Ghettos begin to emerge informally even before they are legally mandated. Jews cluster together for safety, for mutual aid, for identity. Walls are not always built of stone. Sometimes they are built of fear, of custom, of enforced separation. The sense of enclosure grows. Visual markers are imposed. Badges, hats, colors. Jews are required to identify themselves publicly, turning bodies into signals. This is not merely humiliation. It is preparation. It teaches the surrounding population how to see Jews not as individuals, but as a category, a problem, a presence to be managed. The promises of protection that rulers once offered prove fragile. Charters can be revoked, privileges rescinded. A king in need of funds may tax Jewish communities heavily, then expel them when the treasury is full. The logic is brutal and efficient. Jews are both asset and liability, tolerated only so long as they are useful. Despite this, Jewish life does not collapse. It adapts yet again. Communities strengthen internal support systems. Charity becomes central, ensuring that the poor are fed and the vulnerable protected. Education intensifies. Knowledge is passed down with urgency, as if each generation understands that continuity is an act of resistance. Stories change tone. Where earlier generations spoke of survival and adaptation, now they speak of warning. Legends incorporate betrayal. Prayers include pleas for protection. Memory grows darker, but also sharper. Every accusation is remembered. Every broken promise is cataloged. Children learn early that innocence offers no shield. That truth may not matter. That visibility can be dangerous. And yet, they also learn pride. They learn that identity is not defined by what others say. They learn that law and tradition offer dignity even when the world does not. The machinery of accusation grows more sophisticated. Post-desecration myths emerge, claiming Jews steal and defile sacred objects. Plague strike, and Jews are accused of poisoning wells. During the Black Death, entire communities are wiped out under the belief that Jews have caused a catastrophe. Fear seeks explanation. Authority offers Jews as the answer. Violence becomes episodic but relentless. It does not require crusading armies anymore. It requires only rumor and permission. Sometimes not even that. The absence of punishment becomes encouragement. The message is absorbed by society. Jews are killable. And yet, contradictions persist. Rulers continue to invite Jews to settle in certain regions, promising safety and opportunity. Towns compete for Jewish merchants. Physicians are welcomed into courts. The same society that expels Jews in one decade invites them back in another. Stability and persecution coexist uneasily. This instability becomes a defining feature of Jewish existence in medieval Europe. Life is lived in provisional mode. Houses are built knowing they may not last. Roots are planted shallow enough to be pulled up quickly. Continuity exists, but it is always conditional. The emotional cost is cumulative. Trust erodes not only between Jews and Christians, but within families. Decisions about conversion divide households. Some choose baptism to escape danger. Others refuse, even at great cost. These choices are not theoretical. They determine survival, inheritance, memory. As centuries pass, the accusations become embedded in culture. They appear in sermons, in plays, in art. Jews are depicted as grotesque, sinister, inhuman. Children grow up absorbing these images before they ever meet a Jewish person. Hatred becomes ambient, unquestioned. By the end of this chapter of history, Jewish life in Europe is no longer defined primarily by integration or trade, but by defense. Defense of reputation, defense of community, defense of existence itself. The world has learned how to accuse without evidence, how to punish without guilt. The danger ahead is not only violence, but bureaucracy. Once lies become codified, they can be enforced systematically. The groundwork is being laid for laws that do not need mobs, for persecution that does not require frenzy. The whisper has become doctrine. And as Jewish communities carry forward, bearing memory like a shield and a burden, they do so knowing that promises of protection can shatter overnight, and that the stories told about them may be more dangerous than any sword. Chapter 8. A New Center in the East. The road stretches on without ceremony. No markers announce a beginning or an end. Just forests thick enough to swallow sound, rivers wide and slow, villages that appear and vanish like thoughts half remembered. For families driven from the west, This journey is not a single migration, but a series of decisions made under pressure. Turn here. Stop there. Trust this ruler. Avoid that border. Every mile carries the weight of what was lost and the uncertainty of what might still be possible. By the late medieval period, Jewish life in Western Europe has been narrowed by expulsion, restriction, and fear. The rhythm of existence has become provisional, always subject to reversal. And yet, to the east, a different political reality is taking shape, one that will quietly absorb the displaced and transform the center of Jewish life for centuries to come. The lands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth are vast, underpopulated, and hungry for development. Nobles need towns built, trade encouraged, taxes collected. They need people who know how to organize markets, manage estates, keep records, and navigate complex economic systems. Jews arrive not as strangers, but as solutions. Charters are issued, privileges defined, rights promised. Jewish settlers are granted autonomy over internal affairs, allowed to govern themselves through communal councils, courts, and leaders. Compared to the West, where existence depends on precarious favor, this feels like solid ground. Not equality, but structure. Not safety without limits, but stability with rules. New towns emerge across the region. Streets are laid out. Markets form at crossroads. Wooden houses rise quickly, their scent sharp and fresh in the cold air. In places like Krakow, Jewish quarters grow alongside Christian ones, sometimes separate, sometimes intertwined. Synagogues are built not as hidden spaces, but as landmarks of communal confidence. Life here is not easy. Winters are long and brutal. Mud clings to boots in spring. Poverty is common, but there is space, and space allows growth. Families expand. Communities deepen. The sound of children fills streets that had been empty only decades before. Jewish population numbers rise dramatically, something not seen in centuries. A distinct culture takes shape. Language evolves into Yiddish, a blend of Germanic roots, Hebrew, and Slavic influences. It carries humor, sorrow, sharp observation, and intimacy. It is a language of home, argument, and survival. Songs are sung that remember exile and laugh at hardship in the same breath. The shtetl becomes the heart of this world. Small towns where everyone knows one another, where gossip travels faster than horses, where disputes are settled publicly, loudly, and often passionately. Life is intensely communal. Privacy is rare. Belonging is unavoidable. Religious study flourishes. Yeshivas attract students from distant regions. Learning is not reserved for elites alone. Even laborers are expected to engage with texts, to argue, to question. Knowledge becomes a form of dignity. A poor scholar may command more respect than a wealthy merchant. At the same time, economic roles remain sharply defined. Jews act as intermediaries between nobles and peasants. They manage estates, collect taxes, lease mills and inns. This position offers protection, but also breeds resentment. Jewish communities are tied to systems of power they do not control, blamed for policies they do not create. Still, for generations, the balance holds. The Commonwealth's relative tolerance allows Jewish autonomy to deepen. Councils coordinate taxation, education, charity, and law across regions. This level of self-governance is unprecedented. Jewish life feels not merely tolerated, but embedded. Daily routines reflect this stability. Markets hum with activity. The smell of bread and smoke drifts through streets. Children memorize prayers and arithmetic side by side. Marriages are arranged carefully, binding families and towns together. Ritual marks time, anchoring existence in cycles that feel dependable. But beneath this surface, tension simmers. The same autonomy that allows Jewish life to flourish also isolates it. Separation becomes habitual. Mutual understanding between Jews and their Christian neighbors remains limited. Stereotypes harden. Resentment grows quietly, fed by economic inequality and religious difference. When crisis comes, it comes violently. Mid-17th century uprisings devastate entire regions. Cossack revolts sweep through towns and villages, targeting Jewish communities as symbols of oppression tied to noble power. The violence is swift, brutal, and intimate. Entire shtetls are wiped out. Families are massacred. Survivors scatter again, carrying fresh trauma. The psychological impact is enormous. The belief that the East is refuge is shaken. Memorial prayers are written. Stories of cruelty circulate, darkening communal memory. And yet, once more, life rebuilds. Because it must. In the aftermath, Jewish communities reorganize. They mourn, adapt, and continue. The population rebounds. Cultural life deepens. Mysticism gains traction, offering emotional refuge where reason falters. New movements emerge, reshaping religious expression and community leadership. At the same time, the political structure that once protected Jewish autonomy begins to weaken. The Commonwealth fractures under external pressure and internal division. Central authority erodes. Local rulers gain power. Protections become uneven again. The familiar pattern returns, though not yet with the ferocity of earlier eras. Still, for nearly 3 centuries, Eastern Europe remains the demographic and cultural center of Jewish life. This is where traditions solidify, where stories are preserved, where rhythms of existence feel rooted rather than borrowed. Jewish Europe, for the first time in generations, believes it has found a place to breathe. But history has not stopped. Borders shift. Empires eye these lands hungrily. Nationalism stirs. The forces gathering beyond the forests and rivers will soon reshape everything once again. For now, the shtetl stands. Lantern light spills on muddy streets. Voices rise from study halls late into the night. Children fall asleep to the sound of argument and laughter. Life is precarious, but real. Flourishing, but fragile. And as this new center in the East grows confident in its endurance, it remains unaware that it has also become the largest concentration of Jewish life Europe has ever known. A fact that will soon make it impossible to ignore and impossible to spare. Chapter 9. Between Protection and Pogrom. Morning comes quietly to the shtetl. Smoke lifts from chimneys, thin and gray against a pale sky. Boots crunch on frost-hard ground. A cart rattles past, its wheels complaining as loudly as the horse pulling it. Inside low wooden houses, children wake to the smell of yesterday's bread warmed again, to voices already arguing over scripture and money and the order of the day. This is a world that feels stable because it has learned how to feel that way. Stability here is not the absence of danger. It is the management of it. For generations in Eastern Europe, Jewish life has existed inside a paradox. Protection is real, written into charters, reinforced by economic necessity, guarded by rulers who understand value. And yet violence is never far. It arrives suddenly, locally, often without warning, and it leaves scars that never fully heal. Between these two poles, protection and pogrom, Jewish existence is lived with a heightened awareness that safety can dissolve overnight. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, sprawling and complex, offers Jews something unprecedented in Europe, a degree of communal autonomy large enough to shape daily life. Councils regulate taxation. Courts resolve disputes. Charity systems ensure the poor are fed and buried with dignity. This autonomy fosters confidence. It allows culture to deepen. It lets families plan beyond the next season. But autonomy does not mean sovereignty. Jews are protected because they are useful, and usefulness is conditional. They lease mills, manage estates, collect taxes, distill alcohol, and run inns on noble lands. They are intermediaries between rulers and peasants, visible agents of systems they do not control. When policies cause suffering, anger seeks a face. Too often, that face is Jewish. In villages scattered across forests and plains, resentment grows quietly. Peasants chafe under obligations to landlords. Priests preach about spiritual danger and social order. Rumors circulate, sharpened by distance and ignorance. The Jew becomes symbol, explanation, target. This is not hatred born of daily interaction. It is hatred born of structure. When war erupts, everything accelerates. Armies move through territories like storms, stripping land of food and certainty. Discipline collapses. Authority fractures. In these moments, protection evaporates. Jewish communities, bound to towns and trade routes, cannot flee easily. They are exposed, identifiable, trapped by familiarity. The mid-17th century brings catastrophe on a scale that reshapes Jewish memory. Uprisings tear through regions that had felt relatively secure. Bands of fighters move from village to village, fueled by rage and belief. Jews are attacked not as individuals, but as embodiments of oppression, collaborators with landlords, enemies of the faith. Entire communities are erased in days. The violence is intimate and relentless. Homes are breached. Synagogues are destroyed. Families are slaughtered where they stand. The sounds of prayer mix with screams, with the crack of fire, with the dull thud of blows that do not stop when bodies fall. Survivors carry images that never leave them. Children who escape grow old with memories that feel older than time itself. News travels quickly in the aftermath. Messengers run. Letters circulate. Communities far from the epicenters feel the shock ripple outward. Fasting days are declared. Memorial prayers are written, naming towns that no longer exist. The sense of refuge that once defined the East is shattered. Safety is revealed as temporary, contingent, revocable. And yet, even after devastation, Jewish life rebuilds. This is not optimism. It is necessity. Survivors regroup in nearby towns. Orphans are taken in. Widows remarry. New synagogues rise on the ashes of old ones. The dead are mourned, then folded into ritual memory, so the living can continue. Protection returns, unevenly. Rulers restore order. Charters are reaffirmed. Commerce resumes. The paradox reasserts itself. Jews are needed again. The same systems that made them targets now require their participation. Life resumes its careful balance. Cultural life deepens in response to trauma. Storytelling takes on darker tones. Prayers emphasize endurance and mercy. Mystical traditions gain followers, offering meaning where logic fails. Songs carry grief and humor side by side, because both are necessary to survive. At the same time, the social distance between Jews and their neighbors widens. Shared spaces shrink. Trust erodes. Communities turn inward not out of disdain, but out of caution. Children are warned where not to go, whom not to trust. Vigilance becomes routine. As the 18th century approaches, new forces enter the picture. Empires expand. Borders shift. The lands that once offered relative autonomy are absorbed by centralized states hungry for control. Bureaucracy replaces custom. Protection becomes codified, but also impersonal. Where once relationships mattered, now documents do. In territories absorbed by powers like the Russian Empire, Jewish life is reorganized on an unprecedented scale. Entire populations are confined to designated regions. Movement is regulated. Settlement is controlled. This is not expulsion, but containment. Jews are not driven out. They are boxed in. The emotional effect is profound. Communities that once felt expansive now feel watched. Opportunity narrows. Poverty deepens. Overcrowding strains resources. The shtetl, once symbol of communal intimacy, becomes a site of pressure and frustration. Violence does not disappear. It changes form. Pogroms erupt sporadically, often triggered by rumor, economic stress, or political manipulation. Authorities respond inconsistently. Sometimes they intervene. Sometimes they look away. Sometimes they arrive too late. The message absorbed by the population is ambiguous, and ambiguity is dangerous. Children grow up learning two truths at once: that Jewish life is rich, meaningful, worth preserving, and that it is always under threat. Education emphasizes resilience. Humor sharpens. Irony becomes a shield. Identity hardens not into hatred of others, but into determination to endure. Despite hardship, creativity flourishes. Literature, music, and religious thought evolve, shaped by confinement and memory. The sense of peoplehood intensifies. The world outside feels hostile, but the world within feels alive. Yet beneath this vitality lies exhaustion. Centuries of adaptation have taken their toll. The promise that endurance will eventually lead to acceptance feels increasingly hollow. Protection has proven temporary. Pogroms have proven repeatable. The pattern is too familiar to ignore. As the 19th century dawns, the balance between protection and violence becomes more unstable. Old arrangements weaken. New ideologies stir. Nationalism begins to redefine belonging in ways that leave little room for minorities. The question of where Jews fit in these emerging nations grows more urgent and more ominous. For now, life continues between extremes, between charters and mobs, between prayer and flight, between rebuilding and mourning. The shtetl wakes each morning believing in routine because routine is all it has. But the forces gathering beyond these towns, the bureaucracies, the ideologies, the ambitions of modern states, are preparing to replace sporadic violence with something more systematic. The space between protection and pogrom is narrowing, and soon it may disappear entirely. Chapter 10: Walls, Gates, and Ghettos. The gate closes with a sound that settles into the bones. Wood against iron, iron against stone. It is not loud, not dramatic, but it is final. On one side, streets open into the wider city, lamps glowing, voices moving freely through the night. On the other, a narrower world contracts inward, familiar faces pressed closer together by necessity. This is not a prison in the way later centuries will understand a word, but it is not freedom either. It is containment, made official. By the early modern period, Christian Europe no longer relies only on expulsion to manage Jewish presence. Expulsion is messy. It disrupts economies. It empties treasuries as often as it fills them. Instead, a new idea takes hold. Jews will be allowed to remain, but only in designated spaces, under constant supervision, separated physically and symbolically from the rest of society. Thus, the ghetto is born. The word itself enters history in Venice, where Jewish residents are confined to a former foundry district surrounded by canals. Gates are locked at night. Guard patrol bridges. The space is cramped, damp, and overcrowded, but it offers something rare in this era: conditional permanence. Jews may live here indefinitely, provided they accept restriction, visibility, and control. What begins as a local solution spreads quickly. Other cities adopt similar systems. Walls rise not as emergency measures, but as urban planning. Jewish quarters are defined, mapped, regulated. Entry and exit are monitored. Curfews are imposed. Clothing laws enforce visibility, even beyond the walls. The message is unmistakable. Jews are inside society, but never fully part of it. Daily life inside the ghetto is intense. Space is limited, so buildings grow upward. Families stack themselves floor upon floor. Windows look directly into other windows. Privacy becomes rare. Sound carries easily. Arguments, laughter, prayer, crying, all bleed together into a constant hum. The air smells of cooking oil, sweat, damp stone, and overcrowding. And yet, life does not wither. It concentrates. The ghetto becomes a pressure chamber of culture. Synagogues multiply, each reflecting the customs of different origins. Schools operate from dawn until night. Artisans work in cramped workshops. Music spills into alleyways. Ritual life deepens, not despite confinement, but partly because of it. Children grow up knowing every face on their street. Elders sit near doorways, watching everything. News travels instantly. Joy and grief are shared publicly, because there is nowhere else for them to go. Weddings are crowded affairs. Funerals pass through streets lined with neighbors who know the dead personally. Outside the walls, the city thrives on the labor and services Jews provide. Moneylending, trade, medicine, and craftsmanship continue, regulated carefully by authorities who want economic benefit without social integration. Jews leave the ghetto by day to work, then return by night, crossing thresholds that remind them constantly of their place. The psychological effect is profound. Separation becomes normalized. Christian children grow up, rarely interacting with Jewish peers. Stereotypes harden in absence of familiarity. Jews become abstract figures, associated with their ghetto rather than their individuality. Distance breeds myth. At the same time, the ghetto creates internal hierarchies. Wealthier families secure better apartments. Influential leaders negotiate privileges. Power concentrates within the community itself. Conflict arises not only between Jews and the outside world, but within the walls, where scarcity amplifies every disagreement. Religious expression intensifies. The synagogue is not only sacred space, but refuge, forum, and archive. Prayer becomes both spiritual practice and communal glue. Law governs daily life meticulously, because structure offers dignity where freedom is denied. But ghettos are not uniform across Europe. In some cities, restrictions are brutal and humiliating. In others, they are porous, inconsistently enforced. The experience varies by region, ruler, and moment. What remains consistent is the principle: Jews are a population to be managed, not integrated. Over time, containment replaces expulsion as the dominant strategy. It feels more humane to those in power. Jews are not driven from their homes. They are simply confined to them. Violence becomes less frequent, but control becomes more complete. The absence of bloodshed masks the presence of oppression. Generations are born inside walls. For them, the ghetto is not a temporary measure. It is reality. The outside world becomes distant, almost abstract. Children hear about it through stories, through glimpses during permitted hours, through rumors of opportunity and danger. Education adapts. Skills necessary for survival inside confined economies are emphasized. Trade networks stretch beyond walls, linking ghettos across regions. Information flows quietly, carried by merchants and scholars. Jewish Europe remains interconnected, even when physically segmented. And yet, the ghetto also preserves something fragile: continuity. Unlike expulsion, which uproots entirely, containment allows communities to remain anchored. Cemeteries stay close. Ancestors are buried within reach. Memory does not need to migrate as often. But this stability comes at a cost. It reinforces the idea that Jews belong nowhere except in designated spaces. It teaches authorities how to categorize, register, monitor, and isolate populations efficiently. Streets are mapped, residents counted, movement controlled. The administrative logic of segregation matures. As the Enlightenment approaches, critics begin to question the ghetto system. Philosophers argue about reason and rights. Some rulers experiment with reform. Gates are opened temporarily, then closed again. Emancipation is discussed, postponed, debated endlessly. Hope flickers, then dims. Inside the ghettos, the debate is just as fierce. Should tradition be preserved unchanged, or adapted to a changing world? Should isolation be embraced as protection, or resisted as suffocation? These arguments echo through study halls and homes, sharpening generational divides. What no one yet understands is how valuable the ghetto model will become to future regimes. The idea that an entire people can be concentrated, labeled, monitored, and restricted without immediate violence will not be forgotten. It will wait, dormant, until someone decides to take it further. For now, the gates still open each morning. People go to work. Children play. Prayers rise. Life continues, compressed but persistent. The walls feel permanent, but not yet deadly. The tragedy is not only that ghettos confine bodies. It is that they reshape imagination. They make separation seem normal, necessary, even merciful. And once separation is accepted, escalation becomes easier. As Europe moves toward modernity, carrying with it the habits of segregation it has perfected, the ghetto stands as both a refuge and a warning. A place where Jewish life survives, flourishes in spite of everything, and unknowingly rehearses the architecture of something far darker yet to come. Chapter 11. Enlightenment without equality. The gates open slowly, almost cautiously, as if the city itself is unsure whether this moment is real. For the first time in generations, the locks remain unused at night. Jews step beyond walls that had defined the limits of their world since birth. The air feels different here. Wider streets, new sounds, new possibilities. And yet, beneath the quiet excitement, something tightens in the chest. Freedom has arrived, but it does not come without conditions. The 18th century announces itself with ideas rather than armies. Reason replaces revelation. Philosophy challenges tradition. Kings and thinkers speak of universal rights, natural law, and the perfectibility of man. In salons and universities, the Enlightenment promises a world governed not by inherited prejudice, but by logic and progress. For Jewish communities long confined by walls, these ideas shimmer with hope. Across Europe, reformers look at the ghettos and see relics of superstition. They argue that segregation is irrational, inefficient, unworthy of a modern state. Jews, they say, can be improved, educated, reformed, integrated. Emancipation becomes a word spoken carefully, wrapped in expectation and suspicion. In places influenced by Enlightenment rulers, restrictions begin to loosen. Gates are removed, dress codes relaxed. Jews are allowed to attend universities, enter trades once forbidden, participate more openly in civic life. The change is intoxicating. Young Jews cut their hair differently, learn new languages, read new books. The smell of ink and fresh paper replaces the damp stone of the ghetto. The future feels suddenly imaginable. But emancipation comes with an unspoken bargain. Jews are expected to change, to shed what makes them visibly Jewish, to become citizens first, Jews second. Religion is tolerated as private belief, not public identity. Tradition is framed as obstacle, not inheritance. Acceptance is conditional on transformation. Families fracture along generational lines. Parents fear the loss of continuity. Children hunger for opportunity. Arguments fill homes late into the night. Should prayers remain in ancient tongues, or shift to the language of the state? Should law be sacred, or adaptable? Should identity be guarded, or reshaped? Outside the Jewish world, suspicion lingers. Neighbors who once feared Jewish isolation now fear Jewish presence. Success breeds resentment. Jewish lawyers, doctors, writers, and financiers rise quickly, their visibility magnified by novelty. Old stereotypes do not vanish. They mutate. The Jew is no longer backward. He is cunning, dangerous in new ways. Enlightenment thinkers themselves are divided. Some argue genuinely for equality. Others insist Jews are a problem to be solved. Pamphlets circulate questioning Jewish loyalty, morality, and compatibility with the nation. The language is polite, rational, devastating. Anti-Semitism learns to dress itself in reason. Religious hostility fades slightly, but is replaced by cultural judgment. Jews are criticized not for rejecting Christ, but for being too Jewish or not Jewish enough. Assimilation is never complete because the standard keeps shifting. Belonging remains elusive. Legal emancipation advances unevenly. In some states, Jews gain citizenship rights. In others, reforms stall or reverse. A change of ruler can undo years of progress. Equality exists on paper, not always in practice. Police look the other way when violence occurs. Courts apply laws selectively. Old habits die slowly. Despite this, Jewish life expands dramatically. Cultural creativity explodes. Jewish writers shape national literatures. Composers redefine music. Scientists and philosophers contribute to modern thought. The energy is undeniable. Centuries of constraint have produced a hunger to participate fully in the world. Yet the cost is high. Traditional communal structures weaken. Authority fragments. The old networks of mutual support strain under the pressure of individual ambition. Some communities thrive. Others dissolve. Identity becomes a question rather than an answer. In Eastern Europe, Enlightenment ideas arrive later and collide with harsher realities. Empires tighten control. Jews are encouraged to modernize without being granted rights. Education is imposed from above. Traditional schools are restricted. Cultural change becomes coercive rather than liberating. The promise of progress begins to feel hollow. Jews are told they are backward, then punished when they attempt to advance. They are accused of separatism, then condemned for visibility. Every path seems to lead back to suspicion. Nationalism begins to rise alongside Enlightenment ideals. Nations define themselves by language, culture, and ancestry. Citizenship becomes emotional, not just legal. Jews struggle to fit into narratives that equate nationhood with blood and soil. Loyalty is questioned. Belonging is conditional. Public discourse grows sharper. Newspapers caricature Jews. Political movements exploit resentment. Economic crises revive old myths. The idea that Jews wield hidden power gains traction, cloaked now in modern language. Conspiracy replaces theology as justification. And yet, many Jews still believe in the promise of emancipation. They invest deeply in their countries. They fight in wars. They contribute to public life. They believe reason will prevail over prejudice. That time will smooth what fear distorts. This belief is not foolish. It is human. It is grounded in real progress, real achievement, real moments of acceptance. But it underestimates how deeply exclusion has been woven into European identity and how easily disappointment can turn reason into rage. By the end of the 18th century, Jewish life stands at crossroads. The walls have fallen, but the boundaries remain. Equality has been proclaimed, but not internalized. The ghetto has vanished in stone, only to reappear in thought. What lies ahead will test the Enlightenment's promises brutally. The same modern tools that offer rights will soon be used to categorize, measure, and exclude. Bureaucracy will replace mobs. Science will replace myth. And the question Europe has not answered, whether Jews can truly belong, will be asked again, with far greater consequences. The light of reason burns brightly, but shadows grow longer beneath it. Chapter 12. Modernity turns hostile. The street looks ordinary at first glance. Shop windows reflect gaslight. Newspapers are stacked neatly on wooden stands. A tram rattles past, sparks snapping against the dark. This is the modern world, proud of its machines, its order, its progress. And yet, on the front page, a headline screams accusation. Not against a crime, not against a man, but against a people. The language is sharp, confident, certain. It does not sound like medieval hatred. It sounds educated, reasonable, scientific, and that is what makes it terrifying. By the 19th century, Jewish life in Europe is undergoing one of its most dramatic transformations. Legal emancipation, where it exists, has opened doors once sealed shut. Jews move to cities in unprecedented numbers. They enter professions long denied to them. They dress like their neighbors, speak the language of the state, send their children to public schools, and participate in the cultural and political life of their countries. For the first time in centuries, many believe they are no longer merely surviving Europe, but becoming part of it. The cities swell with energy. Factories roar. Railways cut across landscapes that once took weeks to cross. Ideas move faster than armies ever could. Jews are everywhere in this new world, not because they have seized it, but because they have prepared for it unknowingly through centuries of literacy, adaptability, and networked life. Banking, journalism, law, medicine, science, music, and politics all bear Jewish fingerprints. Visibility increases rapidly, and with it, scrutiny. Success, however, is a dangerous kind of proof. For those who fear change, Jewish presence becomes explanation. When economies shift, Jews are blamed. When traditions erode, Jews are accused of corrosive influence. When politics destabilize, Jews are cast as manipulators. The ancient charge of spiritual danger mutates and is something new. Jews are no longer condemned primarily for what they believe, but for what they supposedly are. This is the birth of modern anti-Semitism. It dresses itself in the language of race, biology, and social science. Pamphlets, books, and lectures argue that Jews constitute a separate, inferior, or dangerous race incapable of true integration. Conversion no longer matters. Baptism offers no escape. Ancestry becomes destiny. Identity is reduced to blood. The emotional shift is profound. Jews who believed emancipation meant acceptance are forced to confront a harsher reality. They can assimilate culturally, legally, linguistically, and still be rejected as alien. The promise of modernity fractures. Equality exists on paper, but exclusion thrives in imagination. In France, the Dreyfus affair exposes the depth of this hostility. A Jewish officer is accused of treason with flimsy evidence, condemned not by facts, but by suspicion fueled by anti-Semitic press and nationalist fervor. Crowds chant for his death. Newspapers call Jews traitors to the nation. Intellectuals take sides. Europe watches. The lesson is unmistakable. Even loyalty, service, and patriotism cannot shield Jews from accusation when fear demands a scapegoat. In Eastern Europe, the situation is more openly brutal. Legal restrictions confine millions of Jews to limited territories. Poverty deepens. Industrialization disrupts traditional economies, leaving communities strained and overcrowded. Pogroms erupt periodically, often with the tacit approval of authorities who view violence as pressure valve. Homes are destroyed. Lives are lost. The message is reinforced again and again. You may live here, but never comfortably, never securely. Mass migration begins. Jews leave in waves, crossing oceans in search of stability. They carry trunks filled with clothes, books, photographs, and hope. Those who remain do so because of attachment, obligation, or belief that endurance will outlast hatred. Europe, after all, is home. It has always been home. That belief is difficult to surrender. Nationalism accelerates everything. New nations define themselves through shared language, ancestry, and mythic pasts. Jews struggle to fit into these narratives. They are portrayed as rootless, cosmopolitan, disloyal. Even when they embrace national culture wholeheartedly, they are accused of doing so insincerely. Belonging becomes conditional, always provisional. Political movements exploit this tension ruthlessly. Parties form around anti-Semitic platforms, not at the fringes, but at the center of public life. Anti-Semitism becomes a tool for mobilizing voters, channeling frustration, and simplifying complex social problems. It is no longer merely tolerated. It is organized. The press plays a critical role. Sensational stories exaggerate Jewish influence. Caricatures depict Jews as grotesque, parasitic, manipulative. These images circulate widely, shaping perception long before personal experience can challenge them. Children absorb stereotypes before they ever meet a Jewish person. Hatred becomes ambient, part of the cultural air. Science is enlisted to give prejudice authority. Craniometry, eugenics, and pseudoanthropology claim to measure human worth. Charts and graphs reduce people to categories. Jews are described as biologically distinct, incapable of moral improvement, dangerous to social health. The language is cold, clinical, and devastating. Murder will later borrow this vocabulary. Within Jewish communities, responses diverge sharply. Some double down on assimilation, believing acceptance is still possible through further integration. Others retreat into tradition, convinced that the outside world cannot be trusted. New political movements emerge. Zionism argues that Europe will never fully accept Jews, and that safety requires a homeland of their own. Socialism promises solidarity across class lines, rejecting ethnic hatred as distraction. Each path reflects a different reading of the same danger. Family conversations grow tense. Parents who fought for emancipation struggle to understand why their children feel betrayed by it. Young people debate identity fiercely, searching for dignity in a world that seems determined to deny it. Faith, politics, culture, and survival intertwine. Despite rising hostility, Jewish life remains vibrant. Theaters, cafes, newspapers, and schools pulse with creativity. Humor sharpens. Literature deepens. Music evolves. There is joy alongside fear, ambition alongside dread. Life refuses to collapse into victimhood alone. But beneath the surface, something irreversible is taking shape. Antisemitism is no longer episodic. It is systematic. It is embedded in institutions, ideologies, and political programs. The tools of modernity, bureaucracy, statistics, classification, are being refined in ways that will soon make exclusion terrifyingly efficient. By the turn of the 20th century, Europe stands at a crossroads. It possesses unprecedented technological power and unprecedented capacity for destruction. Its ideals of reason and progress coexist with fantasies of purity and domination. Jews are caught at the center of this contradiction, both symbols of modern success and targets of modern fear. The old world of ghettos and charters is gone. In its place stands a society that claims equality while rehearsing exclusion on a massive scale. The danger is no longer confined to mobs or local rulers. It is embedded in national consciousness. And as Europe moves closer to the convulsions of war, revolution, and collapse, the question that has haunted Jewish life for centuries grows sharper than ever. Not whether Jews can survive persecution, but whether modern Europe, armed with science and certainty, will choose to let them survive at all. The answer is forming quietly, in laws, in speeches, in classrooms, in newspapers. And it is far more dangerous than anything that has come before. Chapter 13, War, Collapse, and the Blame That Followed. The gunshot echoes down a Sarajevo street and disappears in a history faster than anyone can understand. In cafes and classrooms across Europe, people read the headline, shrug, and return to their routines. Assassinations happen. Empires endure. No one yet senses that the old world has cracked open, or that the fracture will expose every fear, every grievance, every lie that has been quietly accumulating for generations. But beneath the calm surface of late summer, the continent is already tearing itself apart. When war comes in 1914, it arrives not as a surprise, but as a release. Nationalism, long simmering, explodes into motion. Millions march under flags they believe define who they are and who they are not. Borders harden. Loyalty becomes sacred. Suspicion becomes instinct. And for Jewish communities across Europe, the war brings both a test and a promise that will soon curdle into betrayal. Jews enlist in unprecedented numbers. They fight for Germany, for France, for Austria-Hungary, for Russia. They wear uniforms, endure trenches, bleed, and die alongside their neighbors. Many believe this is the final proof of belonging. Shared sacrifice will silence doubt. Patriotism will dissolve centuries of suspicion. In letters home, soldiers write of hope as much as fear. They imagine returning to a country that finally sees them as its own. The war, however, is unlike anything Europe has known. It is industrial, relentless, dehumanizing. Trenches swallow men by the thousands. Artillery turns landscapes into moonscapes. Disease spreads faster than compassion. By the time the guns fall silent, empires have collapsed, economies are shattered, and entire societies are traumatized beyond recognition. Defeat breeds rage. Hunger sharpens it. Inflation turns savings into paper ghosts. Veterans return home to unemployment and bitterness. The promises of modernity lie in ruins. People search desperately for explanations that do not implicate themselves. They search for someone to blame. In defeated nations, especially, the narrative takes shape quickly. The war was not lost on the battlefield, they say. It It was lost at home, through betrayal, through weakness, through enemies within. Old anti-Semitic myths resurface, now armed with fresh resentment. Jews are accused of profiteering while others starve, of shirking service despite the graves that prove otherwise, of undermining the nation from within. The language grows sharper. Newspapers speak openly of treason. Political movements organize around humiliation and revenge. In Germany, the myth of the stab in the back spreads like infection, claiming that internal enemies sabotaged victory. Jews are named without hesitation. Facts no longer matter. The story is too useful. In Eastern Europe, the collapse of empires unleashes chaos. Borders redraw themselves violently. Civil wars erupt. Armies, militias, and mobs move across towns and villages with little restraint. Jewish communities, already vulnerable, are caught in the crossfire. Pogroms sweep through regions with horrifying speed. Homes burn. Families flee. Thousands are murdered in episodes of violence that feel both medieval and terrifyingly modern. For those who survive, the sense of abandonment is total. Governments are weak or complicit. International outrage is fleeting. The lesson sinks deep. When order collapses, Jews are expendable. Again, at the same time, revolutionary movements rise. Some Jews are drawn to socialism and communism, seeing in them a promise of equality beyond ethnicity and religion. Others remain skeptical. Anti-Semitic forces seize on Jewish participation in leftist movements to craft a new accusation. Jews are no longer only traitors to the nation. They are conspirators against civilization itself. Bolshevism becomes Jewish Bolshevism. A political ideology is racialized. Fear finds a face. This accusation spreads far beyond the East. In Western Europe, where revolutions are less violent, anxiety still runs deep. Strikes, unemployment, and social change unsettle established orders. Right-wing movements exploit this unease, presenting themselves as defenders of tradition against chaos. Jews are portrayed as agents of decay, modernity's most unsettling symbol. The irony is brutal. Jews are blamed simultaneously for capitalism and communism, for tradition and modernity, for isolation and assimilation. The contradiction does not weaken the accusation. It strengthens it. A people blamed for everything can be blamed for anything. Within Jewish communities, the mood shifts palpably. The optimism of emancipation fades. Veterans who wore their nation's uniforms with pride return to find themselves distrusted. Intellectuals who believed in reason confront its limits. Families who thought the worst was behind them realize that history has merely changed its language. New choices feel urgent. Some double down on integration, hoping democracy will stabilize and hatred will burn itself out. Others turn toward political Zionism with renewed conviction, arguing that Europe has proven itself incapable of protecting Jews when it matters most. Youth movements grow. Emigration increases. The idea of leaving becomes not an abstract dream, but a practical consideration. Yet leaving is never simple. Europe is home in ways no ideology can erase. Cemeteries, languages, memories, music, and humor are rooted in its soil. To leave is to abandon not only danger, but belonging. Many choose to stay, convinced that the madness will pass, as it always has. The 1920s offer a fragile pause. Some economies recover. Cultural life flourishes briefly. Jewish writers, artists, scientists, and filmmakers help shape a dazzling modern culture. Nightlife pulses. Cinema dazzles. Jazz spills into dance halls. There is laughter again, and for a moment, it feels like the storm might recede. But beneath the surface, resentment is organizing. Political parties refine their messages. Paramilitary groups drill openly. Anti-Semitic rhetoric becomes mainstream, not whispered at the margins, but shouted from podiums. Hatred is no longer a relic of the past. It is the language of the future for those who promise national rebirth. The Great Depression shatters what remains of stability. Banks fail. Unemployment skyrockets. Desperation spreads faster than empathy. Once again, explanation is demanded, and once again, Jews are offered as the answer. Old caricatures are recycled with modern efficiency. Posters, pamphlets, and rallies saturate public space with lies polished into slogans. For Jewish families, the atmosphere grows suffocating. Children are harassed in schools. Professionals are excluded quietly at first, then openly. Violence flickers, then grows bolder. The sense of danger becomes constant, no longer episodic. It is in the air, in conversations abruptly stopped, in glances held too long. And yet, many still cannot imagine what is coming. Europe has survived wars before. Hatred has flared and faded. The idea that an entire civilization could mobilize its full power to eradicate a people feels inconceivable, even to those who sense catastrophe approaching. History, after all, has always stopped short of total annihilation. That assumption will prove fatal. What emerges from the wreckage of war and collapse is not merely renewed anti-Semitism, but something more disciplined, more systematic. Hatred has learned from modernity. It has learned how to organize, how to persuade, how to seize the machinery of the state. The mob is no longer enough. The next phase will require uniforms, laws, and bureaucracy. As Europe stumbles forward, dragging its trauma behind it, the ground is prepared for a movement that promises clarity where chaos reigns, pride where humiliation festers, and simple answers to unbearable questions. Jews, once again, are positioned at the center of the story, not as people, but as symbols to be eliminated. The long road from whisper to ideology, from accusation to policy, has nearly reached its destination. The warning signs are everywhere, but by now, they have become so familiar that many no longer see them. The world stands on the edge of something unprecedented, armed with modern tools and ancient hatreds, ready to transform centuries of exclusion into something far more final. Chapter 14. The Edge of Catastrophe. The streets are full, but the air feels thin. Flags hang from balconies, bright against gray stone. Loudspeakers crackle with speeches that promise renewal, order, dignity restored. People stand shoulder to shoulder, swept up in rhythm and certainty. Somewhere in the crowd, a Jewish family watches quietly, trying to understand whether this moment is merely another swing of the pendulum, or something entirely different. History has taught them caution. It has not yet taught them how to imagine the scale of what is coming. By the early 1930s, Europe is exhausted. War has hollowed out. Economic collapse has stripped millions of dignity and security. Democratic institutions feel fragile, abstract, incapable of answering hunger and humiliation. Into this vacuum step movements that offer simplicity instead of complexity, unity instead of debate, enemies instead of explanations. They do not whisper, they shout, and they shout with the confidence of those who believe history itself is on their side. Anti-Semitism, long embedded in European culture, undergoes its final transformation. It is no longer merely social prejudice or political opportunism. It becomes state doctrine. Jews are defined not by belief or behavior, but by essence. Laws begin to speak the language of blood, ancestry, heredity. Identity is cataloged. Family trees become evidence. Bureaucracy does what mobs once did, but with chilling efficiency. At first, the changes seem incremental. Jewish civil servants are dismissed quietly. University quotas are imposed. Professional licenses are questioned, then revoked. Newspapers test harsher language. Street violence flares, then recedes, as if probing for limits. Many convince themselves that this is temporary. Another cycle, another backlash that will burn out once reality intervenes. Daily life grows tense, but continues. Shops open. Children attend school, though insults follow them home. Synagogues fill with anxious prayer. Families debate immigration late into the night. Voices low so children will not hear. Where would they go? Who would take them? How much time is left? No one agrees, because no one knows. The regime's consolidating power, are careful at first. They move legally, deliberately, wrapping exclusion in the language of order and renewal. Each decree is presented as reasonable, necessary, corrective. Jews are blamed for cultural decay, economic exploitation, moral decline. The accusations are familiar, but the authority behind them is new. This time, hatred wears a uniform. Neighbors change. Some avert their eyes, embarrassed, fearful. Others grow bold, emboldened by permission. Old friendships fray. Casual jokes harden into insults. Insults turn into threats. The social contract dissolves unevenly, unpredictably. What was once unthinkable becomes sayable, then normal. Jewish responses vary. Some cling fiercely to patriotism, insisting their loyalty will be recognized eventually. Veterans display medals. Families hang flags. Others withdraw, conserving energy, avoiding attention. Youth movements grow more intense, preparing for departure or resistance, though few yet imagine what resistance would require. Emigration accelerates, but obstacles multiply. Borders close. Quotas tighten. Paperwork becomes labyrinthine. Every exit requires permissions that can be denied arbitrarily. Assets are frozen. Savings evaporate. Leaving becomes expensive, humiliating, slow. Those with means escape first. The poor are left behind, waiting for opportunities that shrink by the month. The emotional toll is suffocating. Fear is no longer episodic. It is constant. It sits at the table during meals. It whispers during prayer. It shapes dreams. Parents try to shield children while sensing they are lying. Children absorb the tension anyway, learning too early that safety is conditional. The language of exclusion grows more precise. Laws define who is Jewish according to grandparents and lineage. Marriage is regulated. Sexual relationships are criminalized. The state inserts itself into the most intimate spaces of life. Love becomes dangerous. Birth becomes political. Existence itself is reframed as offense. Public humiliation follows. Boycotts target Jewish businesses. Signs appear. Windows shatter. Synagogues burn while authorities stand aside. Arrests increase. The message is unmistakable. Jews are being pushed out of society not by accident, but by design. Still, many cannot believe annihilation is possible. Europe, after all, is civilized. It has universities, orchestras, laws. It has survived pogroms and expulsions. Yes, but always with limits. Violence has always stopped short. This belief, deeply ingrained, becomes a trap. It delays decisions. It blunts urgency. International reaction is muted. Diplomacy speaks cautiously. Refugee conferences debate quotas rather than rescue. Sympathy is expressed, but action is scarce. Nations protect their borders and their economies. Jews watch the world hesitate, measuring humanitarian concern against political inconvenience. Inside the regimes, plans evolve. Exclusion gives way to concentration. Jews are gathered, registered, confined to designated areas. Movement is restricted. Surveillance intensifies. What began as discrimination now resembles containment. The administrative machinery hums steadily, indifferent to suffering. For those forced into confined districts, life compresses brutally. Overcrowding spreads disease. Food grows scarce. Hope becomes fragile. And yet, life continues stubbornly. Schools operate clandestinely. Music is played softly. Ritual persists. Even here, humanity refuses to vanish. Propaganda escalates relentlessly. Jews are portrayed as disease, infestation, threat. Language strips away individuality. The population is trained to see absence as solution. Removal as cure. The idea of physical elimination inches closer to acceptability, not announced openly, but implied persistently. The transition from discrimination to destruction does not occur overnight. It unfolds through countless decisions made by ordinary people. Clerks stamping papers, policemen enforcing orders, neighbors reporting neighbors. Each action feels small. Together, they form a machine. As war looms again, fear intensifies. Militarization saturates society. Obedience is celebrated. Dissent is crushed. Jews are framed as internal enemies in a time of external threat. Security becomes justification for everything. Families scramble to make impossible choices. Should they separate, sending children away alone if that increases survival? Should they hide, trusting neighbors who may betray them? Should they comply, hoping compliance will protect them? Every option carries risk. Every delay narrows possibilities. By the end of the decade, Jewish life in Europe is unrecognizable from what it was only years earlier. Centuries of culture, integration, creativity, and endurance are being dismantled with terrifying speed. What once required mobs now requires forms. What once relied on rage now relies on routine. And still, the final step has not yet been revealed openly. The word extermination is not spoken aloud. The full intention remains veiled behind euphemism and secrecy. Many sense the abyss ahead, but cannot yet see its depth. Europe stands at the edge of catastrophe, armed with technology, ideology, and a long memory of exclusion. The question is no longer whether Jews belong. That question has been answered with a resounding no. The question now is how far the answer will go. The answer is being prepared quietly, methodically, far from the streets filled with flags and cheers. And when it arrives, it will not announce itself as madness, but as policy. History has been narrowing toward this moment for centuries. The gates are about to close again. This time, they will not reopen. Chapter 15. On the eve of annihilation. The night is unnaturally quiet. Curtains are drawn tight, not to keep out light, but to keep out attention. In apartments and cramped rooms across Europe, families sit awake long past midnight, listening for footsteps on stairwells, for engines stopping outside, for the sound of authority arriving uninvited. Papers are stacked neatly on tables. Passports, birth certificates, letters of permission, letters of rejection. Lives reduced to documents that may or may not matter by morning. No one sleeps deeply anymore. The future has become too loud. By the late 1930s, Jewish life in Europe has been compressed to its most fragile state in 2,000 years. Centuries of settlement, creativity, debate, adaptation, and endurance have narrowed to a single question asked in whispers and glances. How long do we have? The answer shifts daily, sometimes hourly. What is certain is that the world they once knew has already ended, even if its final destruction has not yet begun. The mechanisms of exclusion are now fully in place. Jews are no longer citizens in any meaningful sense. They are subjects of regulation. Their movements are tracked. Their finances controlled. Their property seized piece by piece through laws that sound technical, bureaucratic, almost dull. Businesses are confiscated. Homes reassigned. Bank accounts frozen. Professional licenses voided. Each act is small enough to seem survivable on its own. Together, they form a total erasure of independence. Public life has become hostile terrain. Jews are barred from parks, theaters, libraries, schools. Benches are marked. Streets are designated. The geography of daily existence is redrawn to exclude. Children learn early where they are allowed to stand and where they are not. They learn to lower their voices, to avert their eyes, to disappear as much as possible while still being visible enough to be counted. The counting matters. Registration becomes obsession. Census forms demand ancestry. Clerks trace grandparents with meticulous care. Identity is no longer self-defined. It is assigned. A single Jewish grandparent is enough. Conversion means nothing. Patriotism means nothing. Service means nothing. The category is absolute, and it is enforced with paper and ink. The emotional weight of this realization is crushing. For generations, Jews have believed that adaptation, loyalty, contribution, and endurance could secure a place in European society. That belief has been battered before, but never shattered so completely. Now it lies in ruins. The conclusion is unavoidable. Nothing they do will be enough. Families fracture under the pressure. Some still cling to hope that reason will intervene, that international outrage will force change, that this cannot possibly go further. Others sense the abyss opening and urge immediate flight. Arguments are not theoretical. They determine who lives together, who separates, who stays, who leaves, who is left behind. Leaving is increasingly impossible. Borders are closed or heavily restricted. Immigration quotas are laughably small compared to need. Visas require sponsors who often do not exist. Ships depart full and return half empty because policy forbids rescue. Each rejection letter feels like a verdict. The world is watching, but is not moving. For those who manage to escape, survival is accompanied by guilt so heavy it never lifts. They replay conversations endlessly. Could we have taken one more child? Could we have waited one last day? Could we have convinced them? For those who remain, hope becomes quieter, more abstract. It no longer imagines rescue. It imagines endurance. Inside Jewish communities, life reorganizes around survival. Mutual aid networks operate under constant threat. Food is shared discreetly. Education moves underground. Religious practice adapts to scarcity and danger. Prayer becomes both refuge and protest. Even stripped of rights, even isolated, identity refuses to dissolve. Children sense everything. They absorb fear through silence. They understand more than adults want to admit. Play becomes muted. Laughter rarer. Questions sharper. Why do they hate us? Why can't we go there? Why won't they help? There are no answers that satisfy. The wider society undergoes its own transformation. Indifference hardens. Some neighbors feel pity but do nothing. Others benefit directly, moving into vacated apartments, taking over confiscated businesses, enjoying opportunities created by exclusion. Participation becomes passive, then active. The line between bystander and accomplice blurs. Propaganda saturates every space. Posters, radio broadcasts, newspapers repeat the same messages relentlessly. Jews are portrayed as disease, threat, parasite. The language strips away humanity with scientific precision. Dehumanization becomes normal. The idea that removal is necessary begins to feel reasonable to those who hear it often enough. Violence escalates in stages. Public humiliations, arrests, night raids. People vanish. Official explanations are vague. Relocations, protective custody, labor assignments. Euphemisms multiply, each one concealing a harsher reality. The uncertainty is paralyzing. Not knowing is sometimes worse than knowing. Communal leaders face impossible decisions. Compliance may delay harm. Resistance may accelerate it. Every choice carries risk, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. Negotiations are attempted. Appeals written. Nothing alters the trajectory. As war approaches again, the situation deteriorates rapidly. Mobilization intensifies authoritarian control. Emergency powers become permanent. Dissent disappears. Obedience is glorified. Jews are framed as internal enemies during a time of national crisis. The logic is brutal and persuasive to those who want simple answers. Forced relocations begin on a larger scale. Jews are concentrated into designated districts, sealed off from the rest of the population. Overcrowding becomes extreme. Food shortages worsen. Disease spreads. The conditions are unbearable, but they are presented as temporary. A holding pattern, a step towards something undefined. Families are torn apart by policy. Men separated from women. Children separated from parents. The pain is immediate and irreversible. Names are shouted. Numbers assigned. The individuality of a life collapses under the weight of classification. Still, many cling to the belief that the worst imaginable outcome is not possible. Europe, after all, has limits. Even its hatreds have boundaries. This assumption, rooted in centuries of survival, becomes tragically misplaced. The machinery now in motion is unlike anything that has come before. It is total. It is rationalized. It is insulated from moral interruption. International silence grows heavier. Reports leak out, fragmentary and unbelievable. Mass arrests, killings, Camps. The information is incomplete, contradictory, difficult to comprehend. Governments hesitate to act on what they cannot fully verify. The benefit of doubt is granted to perpetrators, not victims. Within Jewish communities, time feels compressed. Weeks blur into days, days into hours. Every decision feels urgent and insufficient. Survival becomes improvisation, hiding with false papers, sending children away with strangers, trusting neighbors who may betray, trusting systems that have already failed. The psychological toll is immense. People oscillate between numbness and terror, between frantic planning and paralyzing despair. The human mind struggles to process the scale of threat. Normal coping mechanisms collapse. And yet, even here, acts of kindness persist. People share food they cannot spare. They comfort strangers. They refuse to surrender compassion, even when stripped of everything else. The idea of Europe itself feels shattered. The continent that produced philosophy, art, science, and law is now preparing to annihilate a part of itself with administrative efficiency. The contradiction is staggering. Civilization has not prevented barbarism. It has refined it. As the final pre-war months unfold, the last remnants of normal life vanish. Jewish newspapers are shut down. Organizations dissolved. Communication becomes dangerous. Silence spreads. The sense of isolation deepens until it feels absolute. The final illusion to fall is the belief that suffering will eventually end through endurance alone. Endurance has carried Jewish life through expulsions, pogroms, ghettos, and discrimination. This time, endurance is not enough. The system being built does not seek submission. It seeks absence. Yet even on the brink, Jewish life does not disappear quietly. It argues. It remembers. It prays. It loves. It resists in ways both visible and invisible. Humanity asserts itself against a world determined to deny it. The story of Jewish life in Europe before the Holocaust is not a prelude written in inevitability. It is a story of belonging repeatedly offered and withdrawn, of integration met with exclusion, of survival mistaken for safety. What is about to happen is not the natural conclusion of Jewish history. It is the catastrophic failure of European civilization. As the continent hurtles toward war and the policies of destruction move from secrecy to implementation, the moment arrives where everything that came before, every law, every rumor, every wall, every expulsion, reveals its purpose. The ground has been prepared meticulously. The world has been conditioned to look away. The night remains quiet for now, but the silence is deceptive. Trains are being scheduled. Camps are being expanded. Orders are being written. The final machinery is almost ready. Jewish life in Europe stands at the edge of annihilation, carrying with it 2,000 years of memory, creativity, argument, laughter, and loss. What comes next will not merely end lives. It will attempt to erase a civilization. And the world, having watched every step that led here, will soon be forced to reckon with what allowed to happen.